Hey guys, welcome back. So today I just want to share my experience, a recent experience. It might seem like an odd decision, right? Well, I've been programming for nearly a decade now, if I count the years properly. And most of the advice along the way is almost always directed around how we should not focus on languages and instead focus on the fundamentals. Well, I generally agree with that advice, but learning C sharp has unexpectedly become one of the most useful learning experiences I've had in many years, maybe. And I'm not trying to put another language in my resume. I'm not trying to do that. I just want to learn something new, and it's just part of my habit trying to pick up something new. And I didn't realize that would force me to look and revisit my assumptions. So, ironically, this learning of another language helped me also better understand those that I already know. So, again, about my background, I'm a self taught software developer. My professional background is in structural engineering. And, one thing engineering teaches is about the importance of models, assumptions, boundary conditions, etc. And, most methods are based on assumptions, or at least have some assumptions included into them. Every engineering model also, they work until the conditions of the assumptions are no longer met, or more accurately, no longer matches reality. And as I always say, experience changes what you see, and with that, experience teaches you where those limits are. And like I maybe I only implied it, but there's no shortcut for that. And so over time, I realized software has many of these characteristics as well. In many ways, programming languages, frameworks, and tools, they're also models. They include assumptions, and they somehow push. I don't know if it's a proper term, but they guide at least developers on how or what to think or what to focus on. And in other words, the better the abstraction, it's easy to lose sight of those assumptions. They're hidden, right? And it's one of the features of good abstraction, isn't it? So why specifically C sharp? The reason I picked up C sharp wasn't random at all. Actually, it is from what I do at work. I had to pick it up because of some work, some projects at work. And the other part is coming from my personal desire. I always wanted to learn C sharp even before, but unfortunately, I never liked Microsoft. Well, yeah, so go figure. My experience in programming is from different languages like C, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python. What I'm saying is these languages, they have different models, and they influence how you see things in terms of mental models. So when I first learned C, it was just, I would say, simple. Data was mostly data, and memory, especially memory mattered. They're not abstract concepts. They form part, or maybe they're the language itself. So she encouraged me to think in terms of storage, memory, and of course the sense of control, the explicit control. You have to be careful around these things. So why C? Well, don't ask me. It's just one of those things that happened. But as a side note, I picked it up when I jumped into the CS50 online course from Harvard X. So check that one out. It's really good. I enjoyed that one. So now, on the other hand, C sharp feels different. I immediately had this impression about its type or typing system. That it's too opinionated. And types are not simply containers for data. They communicate intent. And it's like some kind of invisible hand that guides behavior. I won't go through the details. But to me, it's just the language feels opinionated in many ways, unlike C. And ironically, I find it interesting. I'm not trying to compare these languages, not pick or pit them against each other. But the good thing is I'm trying to understand one thing in the context of another, and it makes me think of the language as another system altogether. So I mentioned fundamentals earlier. What do people mean when they say fundamentals? The common advice is focus on the fundamentals. But again, what exactly are those? Well, most people would point to algorithms, data structures, complexity analysis, etc. Well, those are certainly important. But after years in both engineering and software, I started to think that fundamentals run deeper, than those individual topics. Well, if I could put it this way, fundamentals are really about understanding systems, right? The assumptions, the constraints. This is especially true when you're operating under the real world, and of course the trade-offs as well. The trade-offs from every decision that we make, and perhaps most importantly, the conditions where all those things are no longer applicable. And in engineering, such understanding often matters more than memorizing formulas. And so I believe software is similar, at least in that regard. So what pushed me to learning is perhaps many of you feel the same way, but I'm talking about the imposter syndrome. It sounds like a bad idea now because whenever you try to keep learning to overcome such imposter syndrome, the effect is the more you learn about the things you don't know. So it's ironic, right? It's ironic because it exposes me to things I realize that I didn't understand well. You know what I'm saying? Well, there are certain things that I thought I understood already, but learning another language gives me that rare chance to revisit my assumptions, to revisit my developed mental models, whether they are really correct or accurate. With that, you begin asking questions that may never arise when you're working with something very familiar, right? Some questions like why does C# do it this way? What is it for, right? And how is it different from another implementation from another language? You know what I'm saying? So those things that I assume as normal, in some cases they're not actually universally normal. So some of the most valuable lessons also come from discovering those assumptions that I've carried for years that somehow I've forgotten already. And if I inject it here, it's like meeting a distant relative in a reunion, and then you suddenly learn more about your family tree, your family history that your parents never told you about. And so I believe this is more relevant today because of AI. We're in a time when software development is really becoming accessible more than ever. But perhaps this is also a similar moment when we moved out of the assembly language and then moved to higher level languages we use today. And as a result, these languages expanded our access, led to development of other stuff like libraries, frameworks, and then again expanded the access to the entire software development industry. And so AI is perhaps simply the newest layer on that, and that could take us to the next evolution. Who knows, right? But if we go back to engineering, it teaches us an important lesson that complexity doesn't just disappear. It just becomes invisible. It just moves somewhere else. Well, with the exception of the cognitive effects of using AI, I suppose there is no danger with using it. Well, I'm not saying over-reliance, that's a different topic altogether, but I guess the most dangerous assumption could be is believing that the underlying system, that it no longer matters because, the tool makes it easier. And like I always say, complexities are invisible, and so is expertise. let me repeat that. Complexities are invisible, and so is expertise. And this lead other people to underestimate, underestimate the again, the labor, the time, the effort, and yeah, again, the expertise, the ability, the capability, that all those things that go into building a piece of artifact, a piece of software. So it's the same in structural engineering, the same principles. It's the same structural engineering principles. They will always apply even when everything is automated. You know what I mean? And in a similar vein, software systems still carry assumptions, constraints, and failure modes, regardless of who wrote the code, whether human or an AI. I know you get the point. So let me finish by going back to the beginning. Why am I learning C Sharp after all these years? Again, I don't need another language. I don't think everyone should constantly chase new technology as well. And certainly, I'm not learning another language because I have mastered those that I mentioned above. Well, I wish I did, but now I'm learning C Sharp because I think every new language represents a different way of thinking, different way of seeing things about software. It's like how seeing new places, opens up your perspective, gives you a different perspective of looking at things, at life in general. It can also reveal your assumptions, your biases, and certainly it exposes the gaps in understanding, as I mentioned earlier. So for me, it also helps me see systems that have become invisible through familiarity. Those things that are too close to us. They say you miss the forest for the trees. And perhaps this is what people really mean when they talk about fundamentals. So let me know in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts, your ideas. I'm interested of hearing them as well. So again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comment section. Please smash that like and subscribe button below. Again, thanks for watching and see you around. Bye-bye.